afternoon for this special book talk. This is my mic. You can't hear me? My name is Marsha Scholz-Lindh. I'm a Sevastopol alumnus and a member of the Sevastopol Centennial Committee. I'm honored to introduce our special guests. The book, Hunting Freedom, is Helga Bobb's family's story of horror, perseverance, and escape. Helga is a Sevastopol alumnus and was a valued member of the Sevastopol School staff for over 27 years. Her husband John was Sevastopol's high school principal for 25 years, and all their 7 children graduated from Sevastopol. David Walker is Helga's nephew and Gertrude Hunt's son, and the author of Hunting Freedom. David is also a Sevastopol alumnus and retired from Multicolor Corporation as the regional pre-production manager. Linda Adams, today's moderator, is well known in Door County as a journalist and realtor. Her husband Jim was a Sevastopol teacher and coach for 35 years. So prior to starting our discussion, I'm just going to read an overview of the book, Hunting Freedom. The historical time frame of the book, Hunting Freedom, begins in the 1930s and ends April 22nd, 1952, when Ephraim and Leocadia Hunt and their children, Otto, Gertrude, Herman, Helga, and Elsa, came to Door County. The eldest, Eddie, arrived in Wisconsin several weeks later. David and Helga will be discussing the research for this true historical narrative of the Hunt family, chronicling the hardships suffered by one of the thousands of ethnic German families displaced from settlements in the Ukraine and Poland during and after World War II. Historians estimate between 500,000 and 2 million ethnic Germans perished through the actions and treatment of the Allies, even though these families had not supported the Nazi regime. This afternoon we will learn more of this little-known history. Members of the Hunt family first immigrated to what is now Elizabethpol, Ukraine, around 1870, where the family continued to live and prosper on farms until 1939. In 1939, the Nazis took over, and the ethnic German settlers, including the Hunt family, were uprooted to a new settlement in central Poland. In 1940, the Nazi SS coerced Ephraim, then a father of 4, into uniform in the German Air Force. Ironically, Ephraim's father had been drafted in World War I, never to return. This was the reason Ephraim was so opposed to war. The last 2 children born to Ephraim and Leocadia were affectionately termed furlough babies. Ephraim never knew he had a 6th child until long after the war ended. As the outcome of World War II began to turn in 1944, Leocadia, together with the help of her children, had barely managed to stay alive in the Polish settlement. As Russian tanks were advancing towards their home, they packed their meager belongings and supplies and set out with 15 other families in horse-drawn wagons to flee. Eddie, the oldest, was 12, and Helga and sister Elsa were barely toddlers. Among the archive photos in the book is a brutal shot of destroyed wagons, dead horses, and people killed by Russian tanks. The Hunt family has always believed the reason they escaped death was having been struck by a Russian tank that then overturned their wagon into a ditch. The family was able to hide under the wagon until dark, and in the darkness they escaped into a pile of straw in a nearby field. In May of 1945, the war was over in Europe, but Leocadia and her 6 children found themselves among 16 million ethnic Germans who were now homeless with no visible support. Upon returning to the Polish settlement that had been their second home, they discovered the atrocities visited on their former neighbors when the Russians ravaged their village. Allowed to live in a grain shack that winter, the family foraged for food, that included small birds, rodents, and scraps of garbage. At night, mother and sister, Leocadia and Gertrude, were hidden from the Russian soldiers. The following spring, the children were sent to live on neighboring farms. Little Helga, only 4, herded cows by day, and at night cried herself to sleep cold and hungry. The final indignity for this tight-knit family came in 1946, when Leocadia was sent to a Russian concentration camp, leaving the care of baby Elsa to the youngest son in the family. The book describes how the Hunts were known as the children with no parents. In 1947, the eldest, Eddie, traveled to a concentration camp 20 kilometers away to see if he could locate his mother. When he spied her in the prison yard, they did not acknowledge each other, but he shouted, "The children are safe." He then happily returned to tell his siblings their mother was still alive. In September of 1947, the children were being returned to the now partitioned East Germany, and their mother was finally freed from the concentration camp. She was reunited with the children, and the family was sent to a camp here near Leipzig, East Germany, not in Siberia as they had feared. They spent 10 months in the camp where Dave's mother, Gertrude, talked about eating weeds, unripe fruit, and stale crusts of bread. Leocadia contacted the Red Cross to inquire about her missing husband. Then, a miracle, the family received word that Ephraim had been captured at the Battle of the Bulge and was still alive in West Germany. When Leocadia was denied passage to West Germany, she devised a plan to smuggle herself over the border. She found Ephraim, and together they made a complicated plan for getting 6 children to safety. First to leave East Germany on Palm Sunday in 1948 were Otto and Eddie. They followed Leocadia's same route by train, then hiking through dense woods, over a creek, through barbed wire, past Russian soldiers to their waiting father in West Germany. 3 weeks later, Leocadia, together with Herman and Elsa, escaped, leaving Gertrude and Helga in a locked room with 3 weeks' supply of food and orders to stay hidden until she returned. Helga recalls, "When the food was nearly gone, Mother returned to us." Unbelievably, the family had made a total of 4 perilous journeys to West Germany. They were now malnourished, but finally the Hunt family was all together. Ephraim had found a small apartment with only 2 beds and a bunk bed for a family of 8, and had rented a small garden plot for food. The entire family pitched in to make it work. In the book, Dave writes, "It's difficult to fathom the courage of Leocadia. The vision of freedom was so overpowering it gave her and the children the courage and strength to attempt 3 escapes that finally brought them to the land of promise." 4 times the family had been uprooted between 1939 and 1948, but yearning for more, the Hunts applied for immigration to Canada or the United States. They needed sponsors to immigrate, and each sponsored family could only have 5 children. So Eddie, aged 18, sought his own sponsor. Rescue for this displaced family came from Dr. and Mrs. Roderick Gordon, an orchard owner and dentist in Sturgeon Bay, with assistance through Church World Service. Eddie found sponsorship in New London, Wisconsin, so he was still close to his family. On April 10, 1952, they boarded a transport ship with 1,222 other refugees to New York City. The Hunt family arrived at Gordon Orchards in Sturgeon Bay on April 22, 1952. And the rest, they say, is history.
Before we dig into the questions you all came here to hear about today, there is restrooms for anyone who's not familiar right outside that door if they need. We will have some refreshments, I'm told, and a chance to talk to the author and the honoree. We've all decided up here that we would much rather write than talk. So spare us as we speak over words. and I'll be the first to do so. Abby cried when I wrote the first story, and then Dave did the wonderful book on. Okay, as you all know, the Hunts were technically termed ethnic Germans. However, the family had never lived, no one in the family had lived in Germany. But like so many others, they were punished by the Allies, a story few people were aware of before reading the book. The original interview of the 6 children was in 1982, which was already 30 years after the family had arrived in Door County. And so we're wondering, Dave, what, and Helga, you're both going to jump in on these things. We're wondering why, after 40 years, you decided to finish the rest of the story.
Well, I'm the one that really started writing the book. I had originally read Linda's article, and I have to give her credit. She kind of planted the seed many years ago, but I didn't really know who would write the book. You know, I felt it needed to be documented. Did I think I was going to become an author? No. No, not a chance. But upon my retirement, I knew there had to be more to the story, and I started delving into looking at journals, handwritten notes, things that were spread about in photo albums, on shelves. I collected information from my cousins that my aunts and uncles had. My cousin's wife also did extensive genealogy. So I had the genealogy portion, at least the start of it. You know, I found more information. And in, let's say, the winter of 2022, I started pulling everything together. And I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. I contacted Linda, explained what my thoughts were. And but I didn't want to plagiarize her story. So I told her what my intent was. She gave me some advice on writing because I was getting stuck. And so I would jot down notes, go all the way through, come back, fill in the blanks, and kept doing that. The winter of 2023, I spent hours every day compiling the information, putting it into book form. Not being a writer, I had my sister-in-law, Kate Thompson, who graduated from Sevastopol. She's an editor for the Historical Society in Madison. So she was a big help, and so my daughter, who goes to Carthage, was also a tutor in the writing department. So I had a lot of help. I can't say that this book was put together solely on my knowledge and my writing ability, because it wasn't. But with that, after a number of edits, and I would say probably numerous edits, I decided to publish it May of 2023. Self-published it through Amazon. I also had gotten advice from another individual that has published numerous books. So everybody along the way was very integral in me being able to publish this book. Why is it important to publish the book? It's not because of revenue, because people that self-publish books don't make any money. And it was really because my cousins, their children, generations to come needed to know the history. And my cousins didn't know any of this. So it was new to everybody, and including my aunt. My aunt didn't know some of the information in the book because of the genealogy that was done. She had no idea what had happened to her dad, my grandfather's father. So it's vitally important, and you know, Jim Adams, who's sitting right there, knows history is vitally important. And we can't forget our history because there's a lot to learn from our history. So that's why I wrote the book.
Helga, what did you think?
Well, I feel the book maybe would have never been written had it not been for my brother-in-law who died before my mother. And Linda and Jim were friends of John and mine, and they came to the funeral, and she was already writing for the Advocate, and I think she couldn't leave it alone because my brothers were there telling stories about stuff, and she even was saying we should write something down, we should have some stuff. Yes, I have a 3-ring binder this thick, but nothing is really put in this book. So I think that's what started the funerals, because my parents never talked about anything. My mother didn't, and my dad certainly didn't. If we asked him anything, he just brushed it off. And that's why I think the book came about. And I'm very happy that it did, because all the letters I got from my brothers, my only 2 brothers, 11 and 12, were children. My sister never talked about it. And what I got from them is what they could remember, not the location where we were stuck for years and where we had to travel from, and David brought that all to light. So that made me very happy that this is about.
It was very impressive that you were able to find and locate so many historical photographs. I mean, that just added so much to it. How were you able to?
The photographs came a lot from my oldest brother. He married a German girl that he met on the ship, and she had family in Germany. So they did a lot of traveling back and forth because we were not able to bring anything over but ourselves. And he would get pictures from my relatives. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had anything, not even any children pictures and stuff. So they provided us with a lot of them, and that's in there, and that are also in the book. And
There was a photo album that was all in German, and that was vitally important. A lot of the photos came from that book. For me, they had to be translated to English, so that told me a lot about the story, who the relatives were, what period in time.
And the photograph book is also my oldest brother's book, and like I said, he kept the pictures. He was always very intense about having everything up to date, and when he died, my sister-in-law gave me the book, so that helped us with pictures as well.
The poignant scene that Marsha read about of the family trying to escape in their wagon cart, how did you find a picture that matched that scene? Where did that come from?
Well, that picture actually isn't, obviously isn't a picture that was taken by the family, but it is very reminiscent of what occurred. That picture came from James Mayfield, who is tied to Stanford University, and he does a lot of talks on the expulsion of ethnic Germans. He read the book, and he gave me some very kind comments. In fact, he has been promoting it to his colleagues at universities and at Stanford University. I did get permission from him to utilize a handful of photos, which I feel very fortunate to have.
Those who have read the book, those who haven't will have to look through a copy. Perhaps some of them are over there of the pictures because they're amazing. And all these years later, 70 years later, today.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, well, we don't want to open it to questions yet, but go ahead. Just one.
Okay, I'm curious because are you German or were you Jewish?
We're German.
Jewish German. Okay, because I thought you were
German, ethnic German.
Because I had no idea. Were you living in Germany at the time?
No, we were living in Poland, German section of Poland.
In Poland, because I had no idea that they were throwing out, I knew they were taking Poles to the concentration camp, Jewish people to concentration camp, but I had no idea from history books I've read or schooling that they were taking German people and putting them in the concentration
The
camp.
reason that happened was my mother witnessed a murder. She said, they asked, the Polish people were fighting, two guys were fighting. And she was asked if anybody witnessed, and she said yes, and she pointed to the Polish person, and she got put into the concentration.
Okay, so they isolated you and your family, not a group of German Polish people.
Here, I'll give you, and I'm glad you asked the question because I'll maybe give everybody a little clarity.
I'm confused.
Yeah, so the Holocaust we all know about. It was horrific. The Nazis, they were responsible for that. So what happened in 1945 when the Nazis were defeated, let me back up. So Hitler took Germans that were settled and moved them into new settlements. And those Germans were told they needed to farm these Polish farms. So the German settlements were in the Ukraine, they were in Poland. That's why the Hunt family never really lived in Germany. So when the Nazis were defeated, the Russians advanced through Ukraine and Poland, and any German settlers were persecuted because they were deemed Nazis even though they didn't support the Nazi regime. So it's kind of obscure because, you know, the emphasis is on the Holocaust and the Jews, which it should be, but what was little known was the number of Germans that were resettled, were executed, were raped by the hands of the Russians. And it was really in retaliation for what the Nazis had done, that Adolf Hitler had done. So I don't know if that helps you.
Yes,
Yeah.
because as I say, that's something I've never known. In the history books I've read, the stories I've read, that it was German people also were suffering.
Yeah.
Which is
What's your
why the family wrote the book in the first
Yeah.
place, to let it be known. Today, this whole program is part of the 100th anniversary celebration, so we have to ask our two Sevastopol grads. Dave, you've spoken about your education at Sevastopol schools and how that education influenced you in your chosen career and also your efforts to write the book. We're going to ask Helga about some of that too.
Yeah, and keeping with the academic portion, how many teachers or previous teachers are in here? Can you raise your hands? Okay. So, you know, as students, when you're in high school, you kind of take things for granted. And you wonder, what am I going to use this for? and as teachers, you probably wonder, am I really getting through to that kid? And you start to second guess. I can tell you, those that are teachers or have been teachers, you definitely have an impact. You know, I didn't know what I wanted to do after I was out of school. A lot of kids don't. What occurred at Sevastopol, for me, paved the path to my eventual career. I took a lithography class that Mr. Leonardson, Ray Leonardson in the back there, taught. It was a 2-year course. We had a dark room, we had printing presses, we had light tables. I believe it was the only course like that in the state at the time. Is that correct?
Not sure if it was the only one in the States.
One of
there were
them.
many, yeah.
Only one in the county.
Yeah. I asked to take it a 3rd year, which was not offered, and I was allowed to take it my senior year. So I took I got asked to work at a couple of print shops in Sturgeon Bay. I eventually worked at Bay Print. I was a graphic designer. I planned on going to college, but I took what some call a gap year. I took a year off. For me, it was a free to go to college year. And, well, actually, I did go to college. I'd go to several colleges, but only on the weekends, if you know what I mean. And some of the individuals like John Schultz were really bad influences. But anyway, I'm going to try to go a little fast forward. I ended up working at Bay Print for 20 years. I designed a number of logos that you see on some of the signage throughout the county. I had ads in Bride and Groom magazine, Yachting magazine. It was a fun, good career. Eventually the owner retired, sold the assets to the business, and I got a call from, it was Wisconsin Label at the time. Wisconsin Label became WS Packaging, and now it's Multicolor Corporation. It's currently the largest printer in the world. And I, of course, got a job there. After 6 years of employment at Wisconsin Label, I became manager of the art department. Did I ever think I was going to manage? No. I had 31 employees in Algoma. I also supervised a plant in California and Phoenix, Arizona. John and I had this conversation just last week, and that you kind of reflect back at your high school, your time in school, and you think back to those things that you didn't think had an impact. Well, clerical and typing, Mrs. Riebel and Mrs. Savage. Well, guess what? I was at a keyboard almost all day, every day. Ray Leonardson I spoke about. He was integral in my path into the printing world. Mrs. Cole's math. I use math every day. Mr. Remington. Jim, I didn't like history. I didn't like history. I'm sorry, but guess what? What did I do when I wrote the book? A lot of history. And now I understand that history is really important. We can't forget our history. Hopefully we learn from it so that we don't repeat things. Unfortunately, I feel like we sometimes do. So Sevastopol was, for me, like, people go to college, get a degree, people go to vacation school. I didn't do any of those, but going to Sevastopol was like going to a vacational school for me. And it ended up becoming a major career. I had the largest art department at one of the largest printers in the world, and I couldn't have done it without the mentoring at Sevastopol.
Going back to the family's journey in development in Dark County, Helga, your school was always Sevastopol Schools.
Definitely, it was like my own home. I love children, so I worked with little ones no matter where they were or what they did. I wanted to be a kindergarten teacher, but it turned out to be I couldn't go to college because my dad didn't have any money and there was no way to get the money to go to college. But I worked my way through and got certified in special ed, and I worked 11 years with special ed, younger adults or little ones, it didn't matter. And I ended up working, once I retired from school, I still ended up working with special ed young adults, and Sevastopol School was like my home. So.
Now, when you first came, your first school was Cherry School, right?
It's like Sevastopol was from 1952, yes. It was Cherry School because they had a lot of country schools. And that became the daycare center or something, but I was there till 8th grade. And I was older, so they moved me up a few classes, so eventually I got close enough to my class. I was still a year older than my seniors were, almost a year older, but that was because a lot of language and understanding the United States, the way things are supposed to be, or history, yeah. So that was a lot of issue with that. But no matter what I did, I always involved myself with children somewhere.
Helga, your family came over here. We've just talked about the issue of the ethnic Germans. So, and many of us have German heritage in our background. But if you were German and you came over here and you were speaking German so close to the end of the war, how did Door County treat you and your family?
Wonderful. That's all I can say. Nobody ever said, well, go there because you came from over there. Nobody ever said that this is not your country. They were very generous with words, with clothes, with food, with whatever. They accepted us like we would have been born here. It was an excellent experience for us kids especially. But when I was at Cherry School, all the classrooms were in those 3 rooms, and when I came then to Sevastopol, actually on this spot, there was a German-speaking teacher in 1st grade, and I was 9 years old in 1st grade, looking very stupid compared to 5- and 6-year-olds. But the best thing was she taught me English as well and translated, so I didn't feel like I was an outsider forever. And the one time we were reading a book, Jane and Dick.
Dick and Jane.
Dick and Jane, yeah, whatever. I was so proud we were reading that book, and as a classmates, and I was so proud, and she would say, ask somebody, well, do you know what this word is or that word? Because we had phonics, so she helped us with that. And I raised my arm up high as I could, and somebody said it was Dick, and then it was Jane. Somebody said and I raised my hand. Oh, I know that word, and it was Janne, I said, which was wrong. The kids, because it's Jane, the ya is a J. The kids in that whole classroom, not a word of laughter, not making me feel awkward or anything. And she corrected me, and I was okay with it, you know. So that's how United States treated us. And it wasn't just me. We went grocery shopping with my mother and my youngest sister, Elsa. And there used to be a grocery store on Harbor Road between 14th, what the pub used to be, and now it's CVS. That was a grocery store. We walked from our place that Dr. Gordon provided us to live in a house. And we walked to get some groceries. Well, we got there, and we didn't know what to buy, and we wanted honey. Well, it took us a good morning to find out how to get honey. We were looking for pictures, we were looking for words, finally my youngest sister goes, bzzz. We were running around the store buzzing, and the lady was so sweet. I mean, it was a home grocery store, but she followed us around trying to tell us. And that's just the vision we ever got from this country.
You just mentioned Dr. Gordon. Those of you who aren't aware of it, in order for the Hunt family to emigrate, they needed to have a sponsor. And Dr. Gordon was the sponsor. And how have the family regarded the importance of that?
He provided us with a home. It was pickers' home, because they used to have cherries and apple pickers, and they used to have those camps. And the main house was usually for the main person to keep these people in picking stuff. And he gave us that home, and we could live there. He provided us with $1,000 for the 6 of us to come over. Well, wait a minute, Eddie wasn't there, so it was 5 of us to come. And
Plus
then,
your parents.
well, yeah, that's right.
So that's 7.
That's right, 5 kids. And he said that we could live there. It didn't have running water and it didn't have a toilet, but it had what we needed. And we could stay there, and then we pay him the $1,000 in that year. My sister, my oldest sister, was going to, she turned 17 in April, and we came April 21st. And her birthday was the 5th. And she ended up, he provided a place for her to stay so it would be less money-wise or less hardship on our family with the younger kids. He took her into his home, and she became the nanny for her 2 sons, for their 2 daughters. And so she stayed with them and helped us out. So it was a gift. Everybody was just a gift in this country.
Dave, did you find that in your research too?
The Dr. Gordon was a member of a church group, an organization that assisted in situations like this, immigrants and individuals with hardship. He was involved in a lot of community service. I don't know if there's any relatives of the Gordons here. I know I believe his 2 daughters are still alive.
They live in town.
Yeah. It's just he was involved in a lot of very beneficial community, active-oriented causes. So I think it was very fortunate that he sponsored the Hunt family, and the Hunts were able to pay him back and eventually purchase land from him. But I think the Gordon family was just kind in nature and very beneficial to this community.
The Gordon family also advertised they needed a large family because they had apple and cherry trees, mostly cherries. And they wanted somebody that had knowledge about fruit. My dad at one time, before Mother found him, he was in Belgium doing fruit tree grafting. So we kind of fit the number. We had the amount and we had the knowledge. My dad had the knowledge, so that's how we got over here.
There's so much happening in our world right now, and one of the questions that I asked David and Helga if they would care to comment on is, how do you think the Hunt family experiences after the war foreshadowed what we see on the news today regarding civilians in the Ukraine and those in Gaza who have been caught in the war?
When things broke out in the Ukraine, Russians advanced. It was reminiscent. I kind of tippy-toe around this. The Russians can tend to be very ruthless in disregard for life. But as far as Gaza, that's a slippery slope. What I think is important to speak about is innocent people, innocent civilians always tend to be the victims. And in my book, I have a quote from Madeleine Albright. She was actually an immigrant herself, and she said, collective punishment such as forced expulsions are usually rationalized on the grounds of safety, but almost always fall most heavily on the defenseless and the weak. Unjust, cruel retribution often follows based on ethnicity. So, again, going back to your question, the fact that it's not widely publicized that the Germans were persecuted against. They were persecuted against because of the Nazi regime, the government, and a lot of very innocent individuals suffered. If you think of Pearl Harbor, if you were Asian in the United States, there was a lot of persecution against the Asians, even though they had nothing to do with Pearl Harbor. There's a lot of examples like that, and when I say we hopefully learn from our history so that we don't repeat that history and that those unjust actions, but unfortunately we do, and that's my reflection on that.
Helga, as a child, and you see this based on the news.
Well, I was only 4. The pain, I don't remember how it is, but just looking at the TV and all the bombing and all the running and all the killing, it just was obviously for us the same way. We didn't know where we were going, and people in Ukraine don't know what's happening, and we're just existing, and that's how I felt when I would see this stuff on TV. And thank the Lord I was too small to really have a lot of that pain.
However, my mother unfortunately did. My mother was 10 years old, and she was raped up to 50 times by Russian soldiers. The village that they stayed in, a number of villagers that were ethnic Germans were executed, or they were beaten or raped. It's unfortunate.
There, adding my own comment, Dave had allowed me the privilege of reading the book, or the manuscript before. And I said to him, I was never aware of his mom, because that's part of the story. When I spoke to the family, they really had never spoken about it until that particular night at your house. It was actually at your house after a funeral. And they talked about hiding Grandma and Gertrude, and which I took it as that. And when I said to Dave, do you want to put that in the book? He said, yes. He said, people need to know what's happening. And I thought he was very brave to do that. And his mother was very proud of the life that she was able to live here. And what was the comment you made about her? That even though she had suffered so much, she always...
She was more or less the peacekeeper in the family. She didn't like, let's say my sisters and I didn't get along, or we were feuding over something. She always saw the bright side of things, and you would never have known she went through such horrific circumstances. She never wanted to go back to Europe. She never talked about it. However, when she was in her 60s, she went in for a physical, and you hear people blocking things out from their memory. While she was having her physical, it all came back, and she had a breakdown, and she recalled the rapes.
There's a family story that you both share, and it's called, it involved 2 soldiers who were in the Battle of the Bulge, and you referred to it as the over and under the bridge. Would you care to elaborate?
One time, my husband didn't talk about the war, and neither did my father. And it didn't matter what you asked my dad, he wouldn't say anything. But this happened to be on a Christmas Eve when we were waiting for my oldest brother to bring his family. He always liked surprises, so he would bring his whole family for Christmas Eve. Dad's birthday was on Christmas Day. And my husband, John, and our family, my 2 little girls and myself, we were already there on Christmas Eve early, and the 2 men somehow were talking about something, and my dad, my husband first said that the Christmas Eve, we were crossing the bridge, and my dad said, "What bridge?" And then about the army, and then my dad says, "Well, I was under the bridge. Had we seen each other, we could have shot each other." Movie story like that, but that was the only thing I ever heard my dad saying about the war.
My grandfather was coerced to fight for the Germans, as many young Germans were. The Nazis said that they would keep the family safe, which they didn't. My grandfather was enlisted into the Air Force. He didn't last very long in the Air Force. He gradually ended up working, you know, a lot of times when you're in the military, you want to work your way up the rank. Well, he worked his way down the rank. And I don't think he was a very good soldier. I think that was on purpose, but I can only assume that there were a number of bridges that went over the Rhine River. And most of them, because the U.S. was advancing toward the Battle of the Bulge, a lot of those bridges were destroyed. There was one in particular, and I'm assuming that this might have been the bridge. It was the Ludendorff Bridge. Jim, you can look it up. The Battle of the Bulge, there were roughly 500,000 Allies that fought in the Battle of the Bulge. There were tens of thousands that were killed. 11,000 Germans died. But this particular bridge, as the U.S. was advancing, the Germans, the lieutenant was waiting for orders to destroy the bridge. He never got the orders to destroy the bridge, and so the U.S. was able to advance toward and across the bridge. Germans hunkered down in tunnels adjacent to the bridge, under the bridge. Eventually, I believe there were 11,000 Germans that were captured, which very well falls in line with what my grandfather was captured, and then that's my assumption that was the bridge, because that was the most well-known. To give you an idea how ruthless Hitler was, because this lieutenant did not destroy the bridge, because he was given orders not to until he was given the order to destroy the bridge, he was executed on sight. So, that's a little history on the Ludendorff Bridge. You can go home and look it up, aren't you?
Another interesting point that Marsha asked that you tell was the story about why your family feels your mom survived the concentration camp.
She was in this concentration camp for a year, and during that time my oldest brother would gather us together on Sundays, hopefully, not necessarily every Sunday, but we'd go visit her on the chain link fence on this side, and she would be on the other side. Well, there's 6 kids all lined up like that, and after months of beating and after months of suffering and getting thinner and thinner, there was a captain there inside also, but he was the captain of the camp. His wife died in between that time. My mother was in a concentration camp and had gotten her stuff the first 3-4 months or more, her, beatings and that. But all of a sudden, one day he came and he pulled her out of the cell and wanted her to come and take care of his 2 little girls, because his wife died and he couldn't leave. He was in there, And so she took care of the kids, and when it was time, this went on for a couple of years, not a couple of years, couple more months, and then it came time for them to clean the concentration camp. They were sending people away. They were telling them, they came with buses, they were telling them they are going to fill the buses up, take those people in to get them washed and cleaned and sent home to their families the next day. This happened to be a Sunday. Well, it was time for Mom to step on the bus. And he always noticed when we would come and visit, and she would come and talk to us and that. And she stepped on the bus, and Captain was just there, and he pulled her off the bus and sent her home to us immediately. And the only reason that was because Elsa was 1, and all these 6 kids, my oldest brother was 12. He saw how she treated his children, and that's why he sent her home to us immediately.
And what had you all said, you thought that those people probably didn't survive that were on the bus?
They did not. We heard that they did not survive any family, going home to any families. But Mother had stepped on and pulled her off. And this is one vision that I can almost see just by saying it. And the weirdest thing was, I said those buses were yellow forever. Why would I say a bus was yellow, and now I'm working with yellow school buses? And went on the school bus myself. And I was just 4 then. So. Some things you do recollect. Just memory throws it back in, I guess.
And going back to, your original question, which I'm glad you interjected, you're right, it's little known that between 500,000 and 2 million Germans, ethnic Germans, died. A lot of them were executed, and unfortunately, they have Adolf Hitler to thank for it. It's a time in history we should hopefully never repeat.
We will take some questions, but it seems that we should pay homage to the rest of Helga's siblings who have gone before. Leocadia had 25 happy years here in Door County in the house that the family built together, from what I read. And it was actually a home featured on the Door County Memorial Hospital House and Garden Walk way back when they started that. So it was a lovely home in those gardens that your dad was well known for, and your mom and Helga. So she had 25 years, dying in 1977, and Ephraim died in 1994. Edmund, who we all know as Eddie, and when you read the book, Ephraim became a baker, which was also covered well in the book. He and his wife ended up, and I never did know why he ended up in Brockport, New York, but he was Jim found through his genealogy traits an article. He was a very well-known community activist and obviously well-loved in that New York town. And also, it was interesting to me to read in the obituary that he had served the U.S. Army in Korea. Eddie died in 2011.
Can I interrupt a minute?
Yes, you may.
We came in April 52, April 21st. Both of my brothers had to go to the Army that fall. They were drafted. Couldn't speak English, weren't citizens or nothing. they became citizens in the Army. They had to make them citizens in the Army in order for them to serve because they were of age. And this was very unusual for us. My mom was just petrified that her boys are being taken away. But that was very strange that that all happened in that same year.
Dave's godfather, Otto, and his wife raised 2 children in Farmington, Michigan, where he was employed as an engineer in an auto manufacturing plant. Otto died in 2002. Gertrude, or many of us knew her as Gert, passed away in 2016. She and her first husband, Wayne Walker, Dave's father, had 3 children and were married 29 years when he died. She worked for many years at Door County Memorial Hospital, later married John Waters, who just passed away this year, I think. Last year. And they celebrated 32 years together. Baby brother was Herman, and his wife Virginia had 5 sons, and we were married 54 years. Herman was employed by UW-Madison, and he had a vacation home here in Door County. He died in 2013. Elsa, who many of you also know, and husband John McCarty enjoyed taking cruises, gardening, wintering in Florida. Elsa had 3 sons. I don't see his son here, but I see a wife. So. And prior to retirement was a manager at Palmer Johnson Inc. And I think she was at Nightingale. You used to see her there. A hostess at the Nightingale. Elsa died in 2019. And then we come to Helga, David's godmother. That's kind of ironic too. A member of the family has been a Sevastopol fixture, sorry, for 70 years. I mean, I had it. It took me a long time because I didn't like that either. And 70 years as a graduate, wife of long-serving Principal John Bobb, whom Marsha read about earlier, and I think you all know that if you're sitting in this room today. Mother to their 7 children. Helga has volunteered ever since I knew her, and because her husband John are responsible for Jim and I being here, I really like John a lot. She has volunteered at every organization, every church group, you name it, and you'll get her baking cookies. In fact, I have to tell you, she baked cookies for the staff and delivered them on her way in here today, so the lucky staff. Helga also, I know she was proud of it, and we're proud of it too, 11-gallon blood donor. Probably right here, right? That's a special education employee and still volunteering in Feed My People.
No, Lakeshore Cap.
Lakeshore Cap. Oh, pretty close.
It's a little different.
Okay, and a lifelong friend to many of us.
Can I say something else?
Yes. Yeah. Raise your hand, please.
Call on me. When John was sick, he had diabetes, and then he had a stroke, and he lived for 4.5 years. And I would always say, well, what am I going to do? You know, it's getting closer, and he was getting worse. And I said, what am I going to do by myself in this town? And he said, you just go to Sevastopol, you got all your friends there, and go to church. They will take care. They will make sure you're fine. And he was so right.
I have so many people to be thankful for because, you know, my career wouldn't have turned out the way it did without the help of others. Same with writing the book. Being in this room, though, I have to mention Carl. I did print out a few copies of some of his quotations. I was fortunate enough to drive to Canada on many fishing trips, and Carl would drive part way, usually to Rice Lake, and we'd have to stop at Marsky's Nook. And you know, Carl repeated a lot of things over again. Sometime, well, let's say in 20 some years, I heard the same quotes and stories. But yeah, I told John, I said, you know, you hear people repeat things, and your kids will say, "You heard? I think you told us that story already." Or your teacher, you know, your teacher might say, well, I told John, I said, you know why they repeat things over and over again? Because those are the things you remember. I'm sure Carl had one-offs. I have no clue what they were. But if you want to read some quotes, I have a few printouts. But he was an amazing individual, and as many rules as he had when he was superintendent, like no sitting on the steps because it's a fire hazard. He had quite a sense of humor. And on one of our trips to Canada, he got a hold of a Sharpie while I was sleeping, and it wasn't pretty.
And he's looking out at us. Yeah. Helga, would you like to add anything before we open it up?
No, I don't think so. It's funny though. I can talk. I just can't think offhand, but if you ask me something, I'll probably ramble on 10 minutes away. But we're open.
I guess I'd like to add a comment, if I can get through it without weeping. And
I tried not to weep, so don't go.
it was, through the years, I told Dave this, I said it was the book I wanted to write. I was never going to write it. But the story of their mother, being a mom myself, leaving those kids, and your quote was so beautiful that Marsha read. We almost should read it again. Because how she had the strength to leave some children, you know, taking faith. I mean, she had faith. She didn't just have strength, she had faith, you know, to leave some behind and go forward with the little ones. I couldn't believe that. For 40 years, I've thought of that.
There was one thing about, see now I'm rattling. There was one thing about her that we were planning to come to this country. In the meantime, my brother turned 18. He had to get his own sponsor. My mother would not, we would have come in the fall. My mother refused to leave until he had a sponsor in the same state, that we would all leave together, because she wasn't leaving anybody all these years by themselves or leave behind. She wasn't going to start with leaving one son there and taking 5 and leaving. So that delayed us 4 or 5 months because he didn't find a sponsor right away. So yeah, that was another push from her being like that.
If you met my grandmother again, she was small in stature. She didn't seem like a, I guess, outwardly strong individual, but she had to be extremely strong to be able to go what she went through, and then to 2 by 2 sneak. And you'll see the route. It was the journey to take 2 kids to the border. It wasn't like, okay, I'm just going to go for a hike. It was a 2-week trip each time to take those kids to the border.
We slept in the woods with the pine needles being our bed. The mosquitoes were biting us like heck. But that was our turn. And she made sure that we got there.
We should have done this on Mother's Day. Dave, can you read that comment and then we'll
Yeah,
open for
the quote was, "It's difficult to fathom the courage Leocadia, the vision of freedom was so overpowering, it gave her and the children the courage and strength to attempt 3 escapes that finally brought them to the land of promise.
And it was.
We can't spend a lot of time in questions, but if there's some that people would like to ask Dave or Helga now, otherwise, when we adjourn, they invite you to look over their memorabilia. Dave does have some books here. He did not want to bring books, but Marsha and I convinced him. He said, we're not doing it to sell books, but obviously there were a lot of people that haven't read the whole story yet, and if they care to purchase a book.
There is, you'll see a Nazi symbol, which is, you know, for some people that might not be something that we would normally want to see, but part of the history was, depending on the number of children you had, you got a medal from the Germans. So it's a part of history. It's not necessarily a proud moment in history, but I was able to acquire. There was a picture of my grandmother with this medal, and nobody knew where the medal was. Probably lost, left behind. I'm sure my grandmother threw it away. But I was able to find a medal, and I ordered it. It came over from Europe. And so in that shadow box is the medal, very similar, the same to what my grandmother had on, and then it has a little story as to why they got that medal. Though it may be objectionable to some, it's still part of the history. So.
And the story is she had 4 lovely children, the most children she had, so they gave her the medal for that. But then Elsa and I weren't born yet, so maybe she would have got 2 of them.
Maybe you weren't lovely. Questions?
Helga, you have a strong Christian faith. Did your family, is that how you grew up, or were they allowed to have faith?
Thank you, Mary Ellen, but no. We had a church at the end of the road when we did find Dad and moved to Zipplingen. The girls, my mom and us girls would go to church. My dad never did much churching. But the church, we grew up as a Lutheran, but we were never baptized. We were in Germany, because during the war you didn't do any of those things. But in this country, people were very generous again. They took us to Valmy at the time, to the Lutheran church, because there was a German-speaking minister. And that gave us more encouragement, and God was always with us.
Other questions?
Helga, could you ID your siblings in that, well, it's a puzzle, and
The puzzle I put together.
it's a great picture.
I'm a puzzle person. I'm a crazy puzzle person. And my nephew, we had a book signing at Stone Harbor, and David brought me this box, and I thought, ooh, nice note cards. And I opened it up and it was a puzzle. So I put it together, and then I had a friend make a tray. This here is my sister, Gert. And this is Elsa, the youngest. That's my brother Otto. Then this is me. There's my brother Eddie and my other brother Herman. And he's the youngest of the boys, and obviously she's the youngest of the girls. And I'm the middle sister, and this one is the middle sister. We also were the tallest. How do you like that? We have some here.
At the library too,
Oh, yeah.
in Sturgeon Bay.
Yeah, the library has some copies. The bookstore in the strip mall has some copies. You can order on Amazon. If you look up Hundting Freedom, Google likes to correct the spelling of hunting. Just be aware. But again, you know, I never expected to. I thought if I sold 70 books, you know, so be it. I wasn't. My intent was not to make money, and I think we're right now, and it's still a modest amount. It's over 500 books have sold. You know, several universities have purchased copies. But if you want to be a bestseller, here's a little bit of information. You almost have to use a New York publisher if you want to be on the New York Best Publisher list, and you need to know somebody. And you have to have a New York publisher. And you know what? Selling on Amazon is just fine with me. It's not a long book, and that's the other thing. I thought if I wrote a book, I thought it had to be like 200 pages, 300 pages. So originally I thought, well, do I write historical fiction? But then as I started researching, I thought, well, I can't make stuff up. Not gonna. So I said, whatever it ends up, whether it's 90 pages, 100 pages, as long as it's factual, then that's the way it's going to be, and it ends up as 104 pages. But I will say that since I've published the book, I've gotten information on some other things, and I've often said, gee, I wish I knew that before I published the book. But I'm sure that could go on forever.
Well, I am grateful that he wrote the book. It's not as big as my 3-ring binder, and now the grandkids and his grandkids and anybody can take a little book like this and have the memory forever, because who knows, maybe I'm gone tomorrow, so I won't be able to say anything, which might be good.
Well, thank you so much for coming today, and thank you all for agreeing to do this event. It was extremely valuable, and you represent Sevastopol so well. So thank you. We do have cookies and some beverage in the back, and if you'd like to stay and look at some of the memorabilia or talk to our guests, please do so.
Thanks for coming.